Hi there, Sir Richard Little from your land partner. We have reached 81, video 81 out of 100. We are in the build phase. We are just coming to the end of pre-construction, so we're almost at the end of the paperwork, or the videos about the paperwork and what's necessary, etc., before we get stuck into the build. So we're over 80%, if you like, through the development process, and we haven't actually dug a hole yet, or not many anyway. So today I'm going to be picking up on, we've talked about a lot of the key consultants and key roles through the pre-construction, what's important, what to look out for, etc. So today I'm going to pick up on reports and surveys, what else that needs doing, so what paperwork needs doing. So some level of reports and some surveys may well have been carried out in the planning process, again depending on what planning route you've gone as to what detail. But in the pre-construction phase, you're having a look at what actually has gone in. Is it still relevant? Is it still dated? So some reports, for instance, particularly in and around ecology, if you got something that's got planning consent on it and planning's been in place for approaching the sort of 3-year, if you like, deadline, some of those may well be out of date, so they'll need upgrading. So the first thing you look at in pre-construction is any reports and surveys that have already been carried out. Are they still relevant? If they're not, right, okay, we need to get them updated. A lot of the other reports and surveys will probably be linked to either planning conditions or reserve matters. So planning conditions if it's a full plan application, or reserve matters if it is outline application, and technical details if it is permission in principle. So I think the best way to do this, because there are numerous, but I just one that's actually on our desk now that's just being prepared for a planning application. So I'm just going to go through what actually the reports and that we do. We do a lot more before planning. A lot of what I'm now going to list out will be done post planning, or some of it will be done post planning. So even reports that may be done as part of a planning process, it's have they been done to enough detail? Have they been done to the correct level? So I'm just going to run through, and not in any real order, I suppose, I think. So one of the first things, and this will be part of planning, is flood risk, the flood risk assessment, and anything that comes out of that. So if you are in different flood risk groups, then effectively what does that mean on site, what restrictions, etc. But we're in pre-construction now, so that really would have actually been sorted, or should have been, but you need to make sure, and actually, has anything changed since that planning consent was put in place? So for instance, the flood risk may well have been redrawn. We had that on a project 2 years ago, something like that, where the actual flood line was redrawn in the midst of a planning application. So anyway, that was fun. But anyway, so is that information up to date? So we'll always check any information that we've got, any reports and surveys, particularly if we haven't had them commissioned, them, we will sort of, get our people to have a look at it, or engage with the people that took it out, or actually carried it out, and actually have those conversations. So, sometimes it needs, as I said before, refreshing. So flood risk, that's pretty straightforward. Topographical and measured survey, so basically that's measuring the site, whether it's the existing buildings on the site or if it's a field, they're measuring it and what the levels are, etc. That sort of stuff is pretty important. Generally, if it's an existing building, it would have probably been measured before the application has gone in, but not always. And again, who's measured it? Are those details, before we start having detailed drawings, detailed specifications, based on whose numbers, who's actually drawn it, whose thing. So again, re-engage with somebody if they've already carried it out. Is it updated? Are they covering it on their insurance policy, basically? So and check them. So we've got quite a lot of stories, some not all horror stories. In fact, there's a couple the other way where buildings and land doesn't measure up as it's thought to have been. And actually, I've got two stories that actually where it ended up being bigger than they thought it was. Mostly they're the other way, but in this case it was. So measured surveys, topographics, yeah. So So, you know, and all of these surveys and things, at the very minimum, they're all hundreds of pounds, and in most cases, they're many thousands of pounds. And that, to a degree, depends on the size of the project, but it's not always. Twice a bigger project doesn't mean to say it's twice a bigger fee, you know. So you know, sometimes smaller projects can have a massive amount of fees, you know, in proportion to the end value. So I'm actually reading the list, so don't forget anything. So ground investigations. Now, ground investigations are generally carried out for two main reasons. Obviously, we want to find what the ground is like, because people will often say that the only unknown in new build particularly should be what you can't see, and that is under the ground. If you're in a conversion, and this is why one of the reasons we steer clear of conversions, is a lot of the stuff is unseen. So there's more unknowns. So there's more, you know, so we can't be so sure. More risk, effectively, from our point of view. So ground investigations. Now, if it's an existing building and it's staying up and it's being converted, but you might be putting more weight on it by adding more stories, for instance, you'll still need ground investigation to see if the ground is capable of taking further weight, or the existing foundation is capable of taking further weight, or do we need, you know, more work to the foundations to beef them up? But in new build, what we're looking at is, okay, what is the makeup of the ground? You know, so really, what sort of foundations are suitable for this? So, you know, it could be in maybe in perhaps a mining area, which you will know, you know, through the planning process. But do we need to, for instance, is the foundation going to be a piled foundation? And if it is, how far are we going to go down? So part of the ground investigations would be what we call boreholes, and they'll just be going down and down and down to find out how deep the foundation, how deep in that case a pile needs to go. And sometimes if you're piling, depending on where you are, particularly again in mining areas, then the ground itself might need to be grouted. Well, we're only going to know that by the ground investigations, and that's why we do them earlier on. But so many people, certainly buying development projects with planning, don't understand what's actually involved in the amount of consultancy work and reports and surveys that are required before you can get on site. People buy sites with planning because it's like an oven ready turkey, an oven ready chicken, or whatever. You know, bang, it's in and you get on with it. Not so, really not so. So ground investigations, not only is it for the foundations, it's also to understand drainage and what drainage capabilities the ground will have, and what restrictions that might impose on you. Because part of most planning applications, at some point or other, will be a drainage strategy. Now, this is where I'll talk a little bit more about the amount of detail. So we are on a site at the moment where the drainage strategy, we inherited all the paperwork, if you like. The drainage strategy was drawn up and it was 38, 40, 42 pages long, you know, and it makes sense. If you read it, it makes sense. But when you looked into it, it wasn't based on enough testing. So actually, it was just a theoretical strategy, but it was enough to get planning consent. So there's a different level. So you need more ground investigation to actually make sure what the drainage capability is in order to make the drainage strategy deliverable. One of the problems you have with surveys and reports is they are largely theory. It's when whoever is going to deliver the project, the contractors and the subcontractors, especially subcontractors, sometimes get on site, they suddenly say, this doesn't even make sense. Yeah. So, you know, it's an example of drainage strategy. Yeah, it's a bit of paper. Of course it works. Yeah, it's fantastic. But actually, on this particular site, and it's not that uncommon, it's not possible. That wasn't possible to actually put in. It didn't tie up with the ground investigations that had been done because they weren't enough. They weren't extensive enough. So that's ground investigation. So obviously coming out of that is obviously drainage strategy, drainage report. So the drainage strategy, as I've already sort of hopefully pointed out, it needs to be based on sufficient ground investigation to actually make it deliverable. So a lot of these reports and surveys we're going to come up with, you need to do this, you need to do that. And we have to make sure in the pre-construction phase that that's deliverable. Yeah, we don't want any nasty shocks when we get on site. heritage statement. So effectively, if there's anything of heritage value that's even close, doesn't have to be on the site. In fact, we were looking at some land a couple of 3 years ago where there was something that was about, I think, a kilometre or nearly a mile away, and they still took it into account because there was a view of it from the site. So it's not just next door, So a heritage statement, pretty much in most cases, certainly the stuff we deal with, is going to be likely. And if it's a listed building or it's a conservation area and all that, a heritage statement or a heritage survey, heritage report, effectively needs doing. Then we look at archaeological. Now, don't have archaeological on every site, but when you do, you need to be aware of it. There's different levels of archaeological. We've got one right now that we have, in fact, in the last few days, we've discovered that we've had the initial archaeological survey, which basically is desk, have a little look, what is there likely to have been over the history in over the years. Well, there aren't many places now that they can't find something that might be of interest, yeah? So on there they found something of interest, so now we've got to go through something they call trial trenching. That's basically digging a load of trenches in certain parts where they think there might be some interest to see what there might be. Now, in extreme cases, that can actually mean you might have to lose some of your development or your proposed development, or move it. Well, actually, we want to know about that in pre-construction. And in extreme cases, it can hold up the process for a long, long time. So archaeological is really, really important, and different levels, of archaeological report. Ecological, so I haven't really mentioned that. So anything natural, really, all the way from protected species of animals, through to trees, flowers, pretty much anything that's natural. And there aren't many sites, again, from our point of view, that there isn't something. Even if you're in the middle of a town, they might say, bats, or if there's any trees there now. So tree reports often, again, generally part of planning, but not always. We've had the ridiculous situation of doing a tree report sometimes when there is no trees. That sounds mad, but hey, if they ask for it, it's much easier to give them it for a few £100 than it is to try and argue against it. We don't like giving money away, but so we have to take the long view, really. So, yeah, ecological, and with certain protected species, there are certain times of the year that you can and can't do the report survey, or the surveys, and then the obviously reports. In some, bats is a good one, newts is another. And if you miss that slot in pre-construction, you won't start. That's it. You won't be able to start, and it is as simple as that. Okay, so you need to be aware of this, hopefully earlier than when we get into the post-planning stage. So there's a massive amount of surveys that might be appropriate here. So I think on our last one included badgers, newts, bats, wildflowers, wild trees, native trees and things like that. Are they protected in any way? So there's quite a lot, and obviously the bigger the site, the more there is for them to look at. And you need to take all of these things into account when you're actually designing a scheme. So you should have generally done it before you got planning. One of the issues, anybody that's watched the planning videos, when we talk about outline planning, a lot of this stuff is not actually consented with outline planning, a lot of it. So this is why we often say outline planning is sometimes not worth the paper it's written on, because you basically got to start again. Yeah. So what else have we had on this site? We had bat surveys, I think I said, badgers, on that site. Transport assessments. So again, not always, but in many cases we get transport assessments. Now that's been particularly challenging during the lockdown that we had, because travel volumes, traffic, there wasn't as much traffic around. We were unable to do some of the assessments because we have to measure traffic flow, etc. If we're creating a new entrance, or we're increasing the traffic flow to an existing entrance, we may have to watch, measure traffic movements, traffic speeds and all that for quite a distance away from the site. And that's not always on big projects either. So you need, at some point, has this transport thing been sorted out? So again, that should really have been part of planning, but if it's outlined, probably not. It probably hasn't been done, you know. What else have we got on this one? Forgive me while I read the list. Oh yeah, landscape. Okay, so landscape's got a big one now. Particularly some of the stuff that we do is perhaps what you might call green belt, green field, edge of settlements, etc. Not all of it is, but landscape is important. But it's also within settlements as well. We still have landscape issues, so we have to have landscape reports, which are sort of saying whether something's going to be visible, not visible, in or out of your project. So that's something that's, say, quite common. As I say, we're getting quite a list. This is just one project. I mean, most of them are relevant on pretty much all the projects we do, and each one of these is thousands of pounds. There's some I've already mentioned that are in the tens of thousands. Yeah. And I think, what else have we got? Oh, yeah, so the landscape thing, that's very important in terms of your scheme design. So, again, your detailed design, again, referring to outline planning or permission in principle even. You know, it's actually, you know, we haven't got enough detail on there. So we're going through the design at the moment. I think we had a design meeting either this morning or yesterday. It's been a long day. Where actually what we're doing, it's on a bit of a slope. So actually in the landscape, taking what the landscapers are saying, you know, in terms of, right, okay, what's going to be visible, what's going to be less visible. So makes sense to some people, put lower buildings, you know, in certain places, higher buildings, you know, somewhere else. And also landscape, you know, hedgerows and things like that, that all becomes part of that. Are they, you know, still going to be visible? Does it matter? How important are they? So they grade all of this stuff. Landscape is generally graded, or land is generally graded as to how important it is. All this stuff you'll find generally in local plan and associated documents. So a massive amount of information out there. And as a reminder, and that's not what we're doing now, although it is actually, to think about it, is you can find out a lot of what's required and likely to be required by other applications in the area that you're actually looking at a project, or, you know, or whatever you're doing, either buying something, brought something, or whatever, what's already gone through the planning process. And you can see, you know, you can see the level of detail that perhaps is required. You can sometimes see the level of detail that's lacking, particularly when things are refused, and sometimes refusals, even at appeal, because there just isn't enough information. So you can look at that, and you can also find out, if you're not sure of who to use for various consultancies, you find out somebody that's been working in that area. So, you know, it could be quite useful for you. And last but not least on this particular project, and as I say, you know, this is fairly extensive, but it's not fully comprehensive, if you like. We've had noise assessments, and they're relatively common as well now. So this is about noise, two things, noise in and noise out. So noise in terms of what's already there. Are we near the easy ones? Are we near a busy road? Are we near a railway? So what noise mitigation measures should we take in terms of our design in order to mitigate, you know, the effect of any noise, whatever it might be. So typically if you're building near a busy road, you might have almost a barrier of earth to take the noise up and away, you know, to deflect the noise from the road. You know, so there's all sorts of different things that you can do. If you, for instance, if it's perhaps near a factory or a nightclub or anywhere that creates quite a lot of noise, you might have to put maybe triple glazing in or something like that. If you see where I'm going with that. And the other thing is noise going out. So if like recently, well, we've got one on our desk at the moment, was a mixed scheme. Part light industrial, part residential. So on that basis, within the scheme, we have to sort of say, right, okay, what limitations of use might there be to the light industrial if we don't put the right noise mitigations in? So a lot of this is about not just measuring actual sound from the roads and from the train, railways, etc. So that's part of it, but also in theory, what noise might we actually create from what actually the proposed use of the development on site. like I say, that's just a list, and I thought the easiest way to describe it was actually a live project. That's a list of the project that's on the desk at the moment. One that as I say, is just about to go to the next level of planning. And a lot of that stuff we deal with in the planning process. But my cautionary note to everybody is if you're buying something with planning, or you've taken it through planning yourself, is that information still relevant? And is the information detailed enough? Might have been okay to get it through planning. Is it detailed enough to be delivered? And this is the purpose. Whoever's leading your pre-construction, again, we always use project manager. Whoever is doing that, then they're gonna pull all this together. They're gonna pull all these various consultants together, and they're actually going to make sure that all the information is fed to the right people. But a lot of this is you find what my dad would have called chicken and egg. Well, actually, which comes first? So actually, can your architect actually really start doing anything in other than basic line scheme design drawing until they know what the levels of the properties are? Well, they can't really, particularly if it's perhaps on a slope and you've got to get access and the road's got to come up to certain gradients, etc. So things like the topographical are really important before the architect does too much detail. And then, you can almost take that to the next stage. As we said, in extreme cases, if there is a high likelihood of valuable remains, not valuable in terms of money, but valuable in terms of history, etc. So from the archaeological thing, you're going to have to perhaps do a lot of that work before, again, you firm up exactly what's going and where it is going. So there's always this, which ones do we do first? So say the cautionary thing here is making sure that any surveys and reports are up to date and they are detailed enough for delivery. In certain areas of the country, there's other specialist sort of type reports that you might need that might relate to particular types of landscape. For instance, we touched on just basic landscape, but, protected habitats and things like that. They've got all sorts of things that can spin off of this. And as I said before, the list that I've put there, I don't think there's anything in there from memory. I don't think there's any survey or report that's much less than £1,000, and in a couple of cases they're in the £10,000 plus. So you tot all them up and you've soon got 30, 40, 50, £60,000 worth of surveys and reports. And you don't have to have a big project to reach that level. And so I appreciate it's not a fully comprehensive list. There are others, and in whatever project you might be in your particular area might have more specialist reports and surveys. We did have one where there was potential for bomb. So that was a different sort of survey. We'd never had that before. In fact, that project's just come back onto our desk. We didn't get that one, but it's just come back as a project rescue now. So that'll be interesting. So ordnance survey, effectively that's what that means. Ordnance, which is munitions, etc. So bombs and things. Never had it before. So that's interesting. So you get all sorts of things, and if you're, you may well have service surveys to understand where perhaps some of the services are, and maybe that might pick up things like a buried gas main, high pressure, overhead lines you can see. So you may have services in there. Didn't need one on this particular site, but we would want them on probably more than we wouldn't want them on. What else might we have? Services, can't really think of anything off the top of my head. It's been a long day, but I'm sure there will be others. So this is just to point you towards, right, okay, what else do we need? Somewhere in the paperwork it will probably mention it, and so actually you just make sure that you are aware of it. So that's probably way long enough on surveys and reports. So it's been Richard Little from your land partner, and I think we're almost at the end of pre-construction, so we're going to get into holes in the ground very soon. So look forward to seeing you then. Take care.